Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Mass layoffs have been a constant headline this year. Turns out, startups account for a huge chunk of this. In the first 4 months of this year, Indian startups have fired more than 6,000 people. In the last 1 year, some 25,000 people. Companies across the board are under pressure, so tonight we'll look at why startups are failing. They were supposed to be the backbone of India's economy. Why are they in pain? And is this trend unique to India, or is this the global picture? On Vantage tonight, we'll bring you a special report with data and trends. The war in Ukraine could have a new peace mediator, the Pope. He says he's on a secret mission. But in India, Ukraine is making news over a cartoon that has been called offensive and anti-Hindu. It was shared by their defense ministry. Now Kiev has said it regrets the episode. We'll look at how Ukraine gets India wrong and pays the price for it. In America, a Muslim mayor was barred from a White House Eid party. But you won't find it in their religious freedom reports that lectures others. In France, the pension protest may hit the Cannes Film Festival. Protesters say they'll cut power at the event. Also, the highlights of the Met Gala. We'll tell you what the fuss is all about. The headlines first. The Kenyan pastor behind the starvation cult will be charged with terrorism. He is accused of inciting followers to starve to death to quote-unquote meet Jesus. More than 100 people died. Their bodies were recovered from mass graves. A Palestinian prisoner on a hunger strike for nearly 3 months has died in Israeli custody. The 45-year-old man was accused of terrorism and affiliated with the Palestinian militant group Islamic Jihad. He refused medical treatment in custody. Political turmoil in Maharashtra in India. Sharad Pawar steps down as the chief of the Nationalist Congress Party or NCP. The 82-year-old leader had founded the party 24 years ago after splitting from the Congress. The move comes amid speculation of a rift with his nephew Ajit Pawar. Turbulent times ahead for cash-strapped airline Go First. It has filed for bankruptcy. The Wadia Group-owned airline cancels flights scheduled for tomorrow and the day after. Go First has already grounded more than half of its fleet amid a severe cash crunch. And Samsung bans employees from using AI services such as ChatGPT and Google Bard. This comes after its staff accidentally leaked trade secrets on ChatGPT. Financial giants like Citigroup, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have already banned chatbots. Tonight we want to talk about startups in India. It's been quite a fascinating journey, but is the dream run coming to an end? We ask because startups are going through hard times. There's been a wave of mass sackings. 92 companies have fired more than 25,000 employees, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a funding squeeze. The easy money is drying up. Thousands of startups have shut down. And I'm not making sweeping statements. I'm talking about what the numbers say. In 2022, more than 2,000 startups shut down in India. And a lot of those that survived are going through a rough patch now. Their sky-high valuations no longer hold. They're being asked to prove their worth. And this is quite a plot twist. Because not too long ago, Indian startups were being celebrated for their innovation, for their ambition, for the promise they held. Now, many of them are struggling to survive. Tonight, we'll discuss why. Why are they under pressure? And is this trend unique to India, or is this the global story? We'll start with the problem, or the problems, because there isn't a single factor that is driving the collapse of startups. There's a combination of factors. Broadly, there are 3 challenges. Number 1, the lack of funds. Number 2, an inflated assessment of the market. And number 3, broken revenue models. All 3 problems are interlinked. Let's take this one by one. With the first factor, the funding crunch. As of today, startup deals in India are at a 9-year low. Investors are tightening their purse strings. Again, let me show you the numbers. In February this year, one startup was being funded every 10 hours in India. Compare this to last year. One startup was being funded every 3 hours. Do you see the difference? Fewer projects are getting money and they're getting lesser money. The decline is staggering. Startup funding in India is down by 75%. You heard that right, a whopping 75%. In 2022, Indian startups raised $11.9 billion in the first quarter. This year, $2.8 billion for the same period. What explains this fall? Economic uncertainty, that is the biggest factor, no doubt about it. The global picture is bleak. Investors are looking for a sure bet. They're taking fewer risks. And while this is a major factor, it's not the only one. Startups cannot just blame the environment. They must do some introspection too. Because the harsh economic climate has exposed their weak spots. That's the second factor on our list. They misjudged the market. Startups, especially internet companies, often talk about how big India's population is. 1.4 billion people, a growing middle class, increasing purchasing power. All of this is listed as an advantage. And companies raise money on the potential of India as a rising economic power, as a major marketplace, which it is. But they may have oversold it because not all Indians are buying their services. The population is more than 1.4 billion. There are 300 million consuming households in India. But out of these, only 10 million are responsible for 50% of the consumption. Let me repeat this. Just 10 million households in India contribute to 50% of all the consumption in the country. And where are these households? In the top 30 cities. Look at the numbers again. This is the target audience for most Indian startups. So the real market is in fact much smaller. And that's what a lot of companies get wrong. CEOs have admitted to making this mistake. Case in point, ShareChat. It's a social media platform. In January this year, they fired 20% of their staff. ShareChat CEO Ankush Sachdeva wrote an email to his team. He explained the layoffs, and this is what he said, I'm quoting, "In hindsight, we overestimated the market growth in the highs of 2021. And this is just one example. I'll give you another one. Nitya Sharma, CEO of Simple. It's a buy now, pay later app. They fired 25% of their workforce. And just like ShareChat, this company too overestimated the market. Allow me to quote again. The growth we were expecting in the e-commerce space in the next 2 years was definitely an optimistic assessment. This seems to be the story across the board. Companies are getting a reality check now, and the startup space is no longer about building the next big thing. It's about proving that they have a viable business. Which brings us to factor number 3, the lack of focus on fundamentals. Startups are infamous for burning cash. It's a business model that relies on taking loss in the short term with the promise to make money in the long term. Well, not anymore. With funding squeezed and competition growing, startups must demonstrate profitability. They must turn a profit. Last year, 23 startups were declared unicorns. Do you know how many of these were profitable? Just 4. Also, what are unicorns? These are companies valued at $1 billion or more. So 23 new companies in India were valued at $1 billion, but only 4 of them were making a profit. And I do understand that valuation and profit are two very different things. But what does it say about their business model? With economies under pressure, investors want to see better books, especially for startups that have been funded before. And here's another figure worth noting. Late-stage startup funding has fallen by 52%. What are late-stage startups? These are companies that have had prior investors. Such companies are well known. Their products or services are already in the market, and now they're facing scrutiny. They must prove that they can make money. So all things considered, is the startup story over? Far from it, we say. Indian startups will recover. Right now they're sick, and the doctor's prescription is quite clear. Swallow the bitter pill, slash expenses, and make money. That's the only way to survive in this business environment. And this is not unique to India. Startups are struggling the world over. In the US, investments in startups have dropped by 31%. In Europe, 45 startups have lost their unicorn status. Same story in Africa. For the first time in almost 3 years, funding for African startups has dipped below $100 million. So there's pain across the board. But as they say, the obstacle is the path and the fittest will survive. You need a leap of faith to start a company. And you need a good balance sheet to keep it running. To Ukraine now, where the war has intensified and a new peacemaker is in the picture. Russian missiles are hitting Ukrainian cities. Ukrainians are striking inside Russian territory. And guess who wants to mediate now? The Pope. He says the Vatican is involved in a peace plan. We'll tell you all about it tonight. First, the latest from the ground. Russia is stepping up attacks. Yesterday, it fired 18 cruise missiles into Ukraine. They inflicted heavy damage. More than 30 people were hurt. 19 multi-story buildings, 25 private houses, at least 6 schools and preschools, and 5 shops were damaged. What's the response from Ukraine? Reports say they're planning a counter-offensive. Also, Russian territories are coming under attack. Yesterday, a Russian train was derailed. It was a freight train. And the derailment happened in Bryansk, a Russian border region near Ukraine. An explosive device went off, and that's when the train derailed. There were no casualties here, but Russia sees the Ukraine in hand. It has no evidence to prove it, though. This has been the story for a while. Towns in western Russia, close to the border with Ukraine, have been under attack. Moscow says it's the work of Kiev, but Kiev neither confirms nor denies. And the casualties continue to mount. The worst fighting is still in the eastern Ukrainian town of Bakhmut. The Americans have released an assessment. They say 100,000 Russian fighters have been killed or wounded. 1 lakh fighters. Some 20,000 died. About half of these were mercenaries, members of the Wagner group. Remember, this is an assessment from the White House, so take it with a pinch of salt. This narrative suits America. It says Russian soldiers are being sent into battle without proper training, which is why so many of them are dying. Interestingly, this is also in line with claims made by the Wagner group. Wagner is a group of mercenaries backed by the Kremlin. They've been leading the battle for Bakhmut. 2 months back, they said the casualty count was 30,000. 30,000 Wagner mercenaries either died or were killed in action. And yesterday, the Wagner chief hit out at Moscow. He said they should send weapons or his fighters will leave.
Сегодня 1 мая, 14 часов 30 минут.
Happy birthday and happy birthday to the company. If the company is destined to die, it won't be at the hands of the Ukrainian army or NATO, but because of our domestic bureaucrats. So these are Thompsons. I have tens of thousands of these Thompsons, brand new, factory oiled. This is a packing slip. The Ukrainians have been checking it all. The last one was in 2016. You don't need to do it more often than that. I propose putting out an advertisement on Avito. I'll exchange these weapons, which are sufficient for a 1 million-strong army, for 300 tons a day of close-range artillery.
That's the level of desperation. He wants to swap weapons for artillery. There's been no response from Moscow, but the Russian defense minister did admit that there is a need to speed up production. Let me quote from what Sergei Shoigu said. The country's leadership has set defense enterprises the task of increasing the pace and volume of production in a short time. So just like Ukraine, Russia needs more weapons. Both sides seem to be preparing for the long haul. And now an unlikely mediator has emerged, Pope Francis. He says the Vatican has undertaken a secret peace mission.
I'm willing to do everything that has to be done. There is a mission in course now, but it is not yet public. When it is public, I will reveal it. I think that peace is always made by opening channels. You can never achieve peace through closure. This is not easy.
What is this about? The Pope did not share details, but we can tell you that he was in Hungary recently. It was a 3-day visit. He met Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He also met a representative from the Russian Orthodox Church. And last week, Ukraine's Prime Minister met the Pope. He came with a request. In the month of March, thousands of Ukrainian children were deported to Russia. Ukrainian estimates say 8,000 children. But Russia has denied any wrongdoing. Kiev, though, accuses Putin of abducting children. And this has led to an arrest warrant against the Russian president. It was issued by the International Criminal Court in the month of March. We told you about it. So Ukraine's Prime Minister appealed to the Pope and sought his intervention in this matter. And we are told that the Pope agreed. He agreed to help. He said the Holy See had facilitated some prisoner exchanges in the past. So is his so-called peace mission about the return of Ukrainian children? Or is the Pope eyeing a larger role in the war? Guess we'll have to wait to find out. So that's the news from the front line. More attacks, more deaths. But diplomatically, where are things at? President Zelensky's charm offensive has worked in the West, Europe and North America firmly behind him. But here in India, there are few takers. You know the reason for that. Russia is a long-standing partner of New Delhi, so picking sides is out of the question. Having said that, Ukraine's actions have not helped their cause. Let me tell you what happened on Sunday. Ukraine's defense ministry posted this picture on social media. It's a cartoon of the Hindu goddess Kali. It shows the goddess in Marilyn Monroe's famous pose. You can guess what happened next. Indian users on social media were outraged. They called it demeaning, insulting and Hinduphobic. All true. But in a pure political sense, do you know what it was? Unnecessary. 5 minutes of research would have prevented this controversy. In fact, forget research. Common sense would have prevented it. The Ukrainian government is now in damage control. Their deputy foreign minister issued a clarification, and this is what she said. I'm quoting. We regret the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's tweet depicting Hindu goddess Kali in a distorted manner. Ukraine and its people respect the unique Indian culture and highly appreciate India's support. Too little, too late. And I'm not talking about this cartoon fiasco. I'm talking about Ukraine's overall India policy. For 3 decades, it was on autopilot. Kiev never bothered to cultivate good ties with India. But once Russia invaded, realization dawned. Ukraine needed India's support to isolate Russia. But that's not how geopolitics works. Bilateral relations require years of focus and investment. Kiev did neither. Think back to 1998, when India tested nuclear weapons in Pokhran, Ukraine criticized it. Just to be clear, Ukraine was not the only one. The US was New Delhi's biggest critic back then. Yet look at where India-US relations are today. Miles ahead of India-Ukraine relations. That's the investment and focus I was talking about. Same with their support to Pakistan. Ukraine has been selling weapons to Islamabad for 3 decades. Total shipments, more than $1.6 billion. Reports say Pakistan is repaying the favor. There are reports of rockets, tanks and ammunition being sent to Ukraine. Unconfirmed, but important reports. Would this defense partnership have unsettled India? Yes, but again, Ukraine wasn't alone. Pakistan's arsenal is filled with Western weapons. So I come back to my first assessment. What Ukraine did to India, the West has also done. Criticized the nuclear tests, criticized the Kashmir policy, and sold weapons to Pakistan. Yet India has excellent relations with the West. What does that tell you? That Western countries made efforts to reshape their ties with India, Ukraine never did. They could never offer India anything strategic. Neither powerful weapons, nor political support on Kashmir, nor an expanding people-to-people exchange. And guess who did? Russia did. They criticized the nuclear tests in 1998 too, but they never joined the sanctions. In 2019, when Kashmir's statehood was revoked, Russia did not meddle. They called it India's internal matter. The fact is, Ukraine's past is haunting its relations with India in the present. I'll give an example of it. Last month, Kiev sent its deputy foreign minister to India, the same minister who apologized for the cartoon. She got 2 books from India's Minister of State for External Affairs. Guess what they were about? The history of Kashmir. Coincidence? Well, there's no such thing in diplomacy. Which brings us to the present day. Would things have been different if Ukraine had invested more in this relationship? If they'd stayed clear of Pakistan, or if they'd backed India on Kashmir? We can't say for sure. But Zelensky may have had more of New Delhi's attention. Maybe through more aid, or through peace negotiations, or maybe through the current G20 presidency. Remember, Ukraine is not part of the G20, but Kiev wants New Delhi to invite Zelensky to address virtually. So far, the government of India has been non-committal. In conclusion, let me say this. India's position on the war is less about Ukraine and more about Russia, and there is no disputing that. But that doesn't give Kiev a free pass. Their actions, or the lack of it, have not helped their cause. This offensive cartoon is the latest example. It reflects a lack of understanding about Indian sentiments and feelings. And this is the result of years of policy neglect. Joe Biden hosted an Eid party on Monday. It was a big deal for Muslim Americans. Donald Trump had cancelled these parties when he was the president. Biden has revived them. It's part of his so-called inclusive branding. Just how inclusive? Let me tell you. One member on Biden's guest list never made it to the party. The Secret Service called him and said, "Don't come." It wasn't just any member, though. It was the Muslim mayor of a city in New Jersey. Sounds fishy? Wait till you hear the details. Mohammad Khairullah is the longest-serving Muslim mayor in New Jersey. His first term began in the year 2001. Just before he was scheduled to reach the White House, the Secret Service called him. They said his security had not been cleared. Why? The Secret Service did not say. In fact, they still haven't. So Mohammad Khairullah returned home to New Jersey. Let me quote what he said later. "It left me baffled, shocked, and disappointed. It's not a matter of not going to a party, it's why I did not go. And it's a list that has targeted me because of my identity." What list is he talking about? The FBI has something called the Terror Screening Data Set. It has thousands of names, mostly Muslim. Reports say Mohammad Khairullah is on it, on that list. Or at least someone with his name and date of birth is on that list. So the assumption is that's what blocked the mayor's entry. In simple words, religious profiling. This is a man who's been living in America for 32 years, 14 of which he spent as a volunteer firefighter. In 2001, he was elected as mayor of his city. He's even got a movie about himself. It's called Mayor Mohammed. It traces his battle against Islamophobia in the US. And how does the US government thank him for his services? By blocking him from the White House. And this has happened before. The same mayor was stopped at a New York airport in 2019. He was grilled for 3 hours. The questions included, do you know any terrorist? He was also stopped at the US-Canada border, that too while traveling with his family. So it's not a one-off incident. It's something that's been happening repeatedly. And don't forget, Mohammad Khairullah is a mayor. If he can be harassed like this, what chance do ordinary Muslim Americans have? So much for America being the land of the free. Can you imagine the outrage if this had happened somewhere else? The lecturing would have been non-stop. But this time, the White House is silent. No comment on why an American mayor was religiously profiled. Perhaps they can include it in their annual Religious Freedoms Report. Yes, it's that time of the year. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedoms published its report on Monday. Quick side note, this is not a U.S. government authority. It's an independent federal agency that advises the State Department. What does this year's report say? Well, more of the same. They once again want India to be blacklisted by the White House. That's the 4th time since 2020. Talk about an unhealthy obsession. Now, there's no way the US government will implement this suggestion, but these reports do tell a story. Every country in the world gets a chapter in it, every country except the United States. This year's report accuses India of targeting the Muslim minority. But where is the mention of America's rising Islamophobia? Hate crimes against Muslims are up by 9%. Muslim mayors are getting profiled by the Secret Service. Yet the US believes it can lecture the rest of the world. Honestly, we're tired of this hypocrisy, of these unsolicited reports and advice. Joe Biden can host as many Eid parties as he wants to. He can sweet-talk Muslims, but none of it changes his country's record. A recent poll found that 62% American Muslims felt religion-based hostility. 65% felt disrespected because of their religion. Why not include that in the Religious Freedoms Report? It's very easy to sit on a perch and criticize. It's much harder to acknowledge problems and tackle them. Just ask the White House. They still won't say why a Muslim mayor was blocked from their Eid party. In France, the top headline is still protests. No matter what President Emmanuel Macron does, he can't seem to quell the protests. Yesterday was International Workers' Day, or Labour Day. So, of course, France took to the streets. More than 300,000 people demonstrated. They were against Macron's pension reform. He passed that law last month. He raised the retirement age in France from 62 to 64, and the people are having none of it. They do not want to work for 2 more years. They began protesting months before the pension bill was passed. When Macron signed the law last month, He lit the fuse, and the fires are spreading across the country, quite literally. Fires were set across Paris and other cities yesterday. People are protesting in all kinds of ways. They're resorting to all kinds of measures to show anger. The latest threat involves the Cannes Film Festival. France is hosting the festival this month, and protesters say they will cut power. So the red carpet event may go dark. How will President Macron deal with this? Here's a report.
This is Paris. The city of love is angry. These are images from Labor Day. Some 300,000 people were out in the streets to protest. They hurled petrol bombs at the police. One officer was seriously injured. Similar scenes were witnessed across the country. There was violence and arson in Lyon and Nantes too. Cars and buildings were set ablaze. Reports say radicalized elements had joined the annual Labor Day demonstrations. These young people, clad in black, were reportedly behind the violence. It was widely condemned. France's Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, called the violence unacceptable. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said the violent thugs had one objective: to kill cops and attack property. He said more than 100 police officers were injured in Monday's violence, and almost 300 protesters were arrested. What is fueling this protest? Why are the people of France angry? They're against a pension reform. It raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. The French don't want to work for 2 more years, so they're demonstrating. They want the law to be repealed. And they say they won't rest till Macron relents. The French president has called for 100 days of peace. The protesters refuted by calling for 100 days of anger.
We will continue until the withdrawal. We will not give up because we listen to what the population wants. And the population doesn't want it. The government doesn't listen to us. The employers don't listen to us either. We will continue with perhaps different forms of struggle, but we won't give up because we listen to the voice of the workers.
What are these different forms of struggle? Well, it means some of France's upcoming cultural events face a blackout risk. You see, French protesters are getting creative. They've been cutting the electricity at various places Macron visits, like the airport in the city of Montpellier and a local school that Macron visited. Their next target is the Cannes Film Festival. It's been happening for 76 years. It's hosted in the southern city of Cannes every year. This year, it'll be on from May 16th to May 27th. Right in the middle of the 100 days of anger. If the protesters do shut off power there, it'll be a big blow for French tourism. How will the country invite visitors if it can't even keep the lights on? But the protesters are hoping to get support from French celebrities at Cannes. Several French stars have opposed the pension reforms too. In March, 300 celebrities wrote an open letter to Macron. They demanded that he withdraw the legislation. So these French stars may not mind a pitch-black red carpet. The Cannes Film Festival isn't the only event at risk. The Formula One Monaco Grand Prix and the Tennis French Open may get their lights cut too. And despite the risks, despite the reputational damage to France, the protesters are determined. But for how long?
I'm more determined than ever. Macron has to stay on for 4 more years. We will go on for 4 more years, no problem. I'm here. And there will be more of us. We will win in the end. I'm convinced. I'm convinced.
Unless he backs down, it looks like Macron has a rough few years ahead of him.
From a country which is famous for protests to one which is infamous for crushing them. We're talking about China. Stifling dissent is an old policy of the Chinese state, and here's the latest addition to it. Exit bans. In fact, they're not new. China has been using exit bans for a while, only now they use it more aggressively. What are exit bans? Quite simply, this is China banning the exit of critics from the country. They're not allowed to leave China. In 2016, there were less than 5,000 such cases. By 2020, the number touched 39,000. So Beijing banned 39,000 people from leaving China in the year 2020. And that's most likely an undercount. Says who? A report released by a rights group called Safeguard Defenders. They say it can take 2 years for exit ban data to be uploaded, so the actual number of people trapped by China could be much higher. Which brings us to another question. How are these exit bans imposed? through a series of draconian laws. China has a total of 15 laws for this, 15 laws that enable exit bans. 5 of these laws were passed between 2018 and 2022, and the laws are absurd. I'll give you an example. There's something called the supervision law in China. It allows exit bans on people under investigation. So if you're facing a probe, you cannot leave. Fair enough. But it gets worse. You may or may not be a suspect. If you're connected to an investigation in any way, you cannot leave China. So witnesses, lawyers, or anyone else Beijing deems connected can be trapped. And you can bet the laws are being misused. The report says, and I quote, "Since Xi Jinping took power in 2012, China has expanded the legal landscape for exit bans and increasingly used them, sometimes outside legal justification, on everyone from activists to foreign journalists and for transnational repression and other coercive practices." Next question. Why does China do this? The answer again lies in the report. It says, and I'm quoting again, "The bans are used to silence activists, pressure family members to return to China to face investigation, intimidate foreign journalists as a tool of hostage diplomacy, and to control ethnic, religious groups." Basically, these bans are used to bring critics and dissenters to heel. And China has been using such means for decades now. Take the Tiananmen Square protesters. The protest happened in 1989. The state carried out a brutal massacre. Hundreds of civilians were killed because they protested. Many of those who survived fled the country. But their families were still in China, and those family members were not allowed to leave. So the protesters had to go back and face arrest if they wanted to meet their families again. Like I said, China has been doing this for years. It has been harassing its own people. But under Xi Jinping, the scope has widened. Now they use exit bans against foreign journalists too. It's an intimidation tactic. You criticize China and they may trap your reporter. Then comes hostage diplomacy. You make a move against China and they may trap your citizens, because exit bans apply to foreign nationals too. It's quite a devious take on foreign relations. And of course, China uses it to control ethnic and religious minorities. The most glaring example is Xinjiang, where more than 1 million Muslims have been jailed and persecuted by the Chinese state. Some escaped and told the horror stories to the world, but their families were left behind. And exit bans mean that these Uyghur Muslims have to go back to see their families again. It's a brutal replay of the Tiananmen Square scenario. Now you can argue that other countries impose travel bans too, even on foreigners under investigation in criminal cases, which is fair. But China's exit bans do not work like that. Most of them are related to civil business disputes. These cases may drag on for years and people remain trapped in China for years. Foreign business executives too. Let me give you an example. An Irish executive called Richard O'Halloran was trapped in China for 3 years between 2019 and 2022. This was for a civil dispute involving his company, a dispute that began even before this man joined the company. In fact, he went to China to resolve it, and they trapped him there for 3 years. So when China says it's open for business, you can imagine why the world is wary. You may be walking into a Hotel California-like situation. You can check out any time you like, but you may never leave. Do you remember that couple in college? Everyone was rooting for them. People thought they could have done so much together, but somehow things never worked out. In our neighborhood, that couple is India and Iran. Historical links, shared cultural, geographical proximity. A lot of green flags, but somehow things haven't worked out. I'm not saying the relations are bad. I'm saying they could have been much, much better. Why are we talking about it now? Because India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is visiting Iran. He met his counterpart. He also met President Ibrahim Raisi. Officially, there is no word from the government of India. But here's what Tehran is saying. The relations between Iran and India are not against any other country and are not affected by the will of third parties. Activating the Riyal Rupee mechanism is a necessary and important action that will play a decisive role in advancing common goals in various economic fields. Iran's president spoke on similar lines. He talked about deepening economic and commercial ties. So let's look at where they stand. Bilateral trade in 2022 was $2.5 billion. That's an increase of 48%. Most of this trade is petroleum exports from Iran. But if you rewind to the last decade, the number was much higher. In 2014, bilateral trade was $13 billion. So what has changed in the last 9 years? Western sanctions. When Donald Trump reimposed sanctions on Iran, India stopped buying oil. As a result, bilateral trade suffered. Even now, trading with Iran is extremely difficult. So what's the solution? One idea is to eliminate the dollar from the equation, which is why both sides are considering the rupee-rial mechanism. It's a good idea, but as of today, it's still an idea. It's yet to be activated. The second cornerstone of Iran-India ties is the Chabahar port. It's located in the Gulf of Oman. India is contracted to develop this one terminal of this port. The total cost is more than $85 million. Some of that investment has already been made. Around $12 million has been allocated for this financial year. Now, why is this port important? Well, symbolically, it's India's first foreign port. It will also help India bypass Pakistan and gain access to Afghanistan. Plus, it's a counter to China's infrastructure push in the region. Just one problem, though. This port deal was signed back in 2016. Since then, the dynamics have changed and changed significantly. Iran and China signed a 25-year cooperation agreement in 2020. Beijing has promised to invest $400 billion in Iran. If you compare the numbers, you will see the problem. $85 million versus $400 billion. It's a no contest. It also explains why the port has not taken off. A, because of Western sanctions, and B, because Iran has moved closer to China. From the looks of it, Tehran has noticed this problem. Let me quote what their national security advisor said. Decisions taken to remove obstacles to continued cooperation in the Chabahar project can be very effective in changing the current inappropriate situation. So both sides realize the problem, and that's an important first step. But the question is, what should New Delhi do next? Giving up on this relationship is not ideal. I'll give you 3 reasons why. Number 1, Tehran can be India's window to Central Asia and Afghanistan. Number 2, it's an important source of diversify energy purchases. And number 3, it's increasingly part of India's current political circles. Iran will join the SCO by the end of this year. It has also expressed interest in joining the BRICS. The only worry is the China factor, which is why New Delhi is cautious about the Saudi-Iran normalization deal. Ideally, it should have been great news. 2 of India's closest friends are trying to mend relations. But China's mediation would have put India off. So going forward, there is only one solution. Shut out the bigger power. India-Iran relations grew despite US animosity. Similarly, they must grow despite China's proximity to Tehran. India should not abandon the Chabahar port project or the rupee-rial proposal, because more options for Iran means less dependence on China. And we're not done talking about bans. Our next story is about a vaping ban. Vapes are e-cigarettes. They're the new rage, especially among youngsters. They come in shiny packaging and multiple flavors ranging from cotton candy to strawberry. They're marketed as a safe alternative to smoking because they contain only nicotine and not tobacco. But they aren't without risks. In fact, they've created a whole new generation of nicotine addicts. Vapes have become a danger no one saw coming. And as we speak, there are over 82 million vape users worldwide. Australia has decided to crack down on this trend. They will ban recreational vaping. What about other countries, other governments? Not everyone supports a ban. In fact, some countries are encouraging the sale of e-cigarettes. Our next report tells you why the world is divided over vapes. Vapes are e-cigarettes, but they can seem so much more than that. They enter lives almost like a savior. With promises of helping you quit smoking, you're attracted to their shiny packaging and their multiple flavors, like blueberry, strawberry, raspberry. Okay, let's cut to the chase, all the berry flavors. And then maybe the cotton candy flavor as well. Vapes are picked up from local grocery stores. After all, they're placed at such a convenient position, often right next to chocolates and candies. So you try one and the game begins. And before you know it, you've been duped. Vapes are electronic devices. They simulate smoking. They heat a liquid, one that usually contains nicotine, and vapes turn it into a vapor that users inhale. So instead of smoke, you inhale vapor. It sounds harmless, which is probably why it's so popular. 6% of people in the UK vape, 1 in 20 Americans. In 2019, more than 3 million vapes were sold in India. But popularity of vapes says nothing about the reality of its risks. It can cause lung injuries and increase the likelihood of having a heart attack. It also causes throat irritation, bleeding gums, headaches, and nausea. And most importantly, it has gotten an entire generation addicted to nicotine because it disproportionately affects the young. Australia sees this, so it has decided to ban recreational vaping. Because, like most of the world, vapes have exploded in popularity in Australia as well. And again, they mostly harm the young. 1 in 6 Australians aged 14 to 17 has vaped. Also, 1 in 4 people between 18 to 24 years of age. The situation is so bad that some schools are installing vape detectors. Some countries are on the same page as Australia, like Singapore and Thailand. They too have banned vaping. But other countries do not share this outlook, like the UK. Last month, they announced a new initiative. It's called Swap to Stop. They're trying to wean smokers off tobacco and onto vaping. And they have made it easier for smokers. They'll now be able to access vaping starter kits. And maybe they're coming from a place of logic. Between 2020 and 2021, the number of vapers increased in the UK, the number of smokers decreased. Experts say the two could be partly related. Regardless, there is not enough data to prove this. And this is surely not a duration long enough to base decisions on. But what's clearer is how negatively vaping affects its users, especially teenagers. Their brains are more vulnerable to nicotine. Apart from physical problems, nicotine also causes psychiatric ones. It interferes with their brain development. So some may say that vaping is safer than smoking cigarettes. But that is no selling point. It is such a low bar. That's probably why aiding these fruity vapes is only leaving a bitter aftertaste. Finally, a story about a party. One with cat costumes and big money. You guessed it, we're talking about the Met Gala. It's an annual fundraiser. Well, I'll be more specific. It's an invite-only benefit, a black tie extravaganza, a celebrity-powered cocktail, and it raises big bucks. To give you an idea, last year the Met Gala raised more than $17 million. Who helps raise this money? A long list of star-studded invitees, which includes Indian celebs too. They're invited to pay and to attend. How much? $50,000 for each ticket. And what do they do at the party? Well, this year they dressed up like cats. But beyond that, do they actually help the cause they intend to support? Here's a report.
Fashion's biggest night out is here. Yes, we're talking about the Met Gala. It's held annually in New York City. Officially, it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute benefit. Heavy name, right? So it makes sense that everyone just calls it the Met Gala. Simple and sweet. Also, high fashion. And unofficially, it's considered the party of the year, with its studded guest list and extravagant outfits. Well, that's one way to talk about the clothes people wear to this event. Every year, the gala is built around a theme. And this year, it was all about Karl Lagerfeld, the late German fashion designer, known for shaping the modern fashion world. So people showed up in black and white outfits, adorned in pearls. They flexed their creative muscle. One attendee looked like she was up for a game of badminton. Another defied gravity. Overall, these outfits found a fan in the audience. But some were so over the top, they crossed over to the land of bizarre. Because we expected an homage to Lagerfeld, but not so many tributes to his beloved pet cat. Yes, attendees came in cat costumes and prosthetics. And we're talking fur, claws, and everything in between. But it works, because it seems like the world is gaga over the gala, and that helps the Met. To give you a clue, this gala has a nickname. It's called an ATM for the Met, because it raises money for the museum's fashion wing. Last year, the event raised $17.4 million. Because this is no everyday charity gala. Though it started with that intention, now it seems like its mission has shifted. It's become a showcase of the rich and famous, who can show off their opulence without feeling cringy about it. It's a spectacle of big brands supporting other big brands, and is drunk on a cocktail of celebrity power. Its attendees include famous names from the world of fashion, tech, politics, sports, and even social media. This year, the gala hosted 400 guests, including Rihanna, Cardi B, Serena Williams, Roger Federer, and Indian celebs like Alia Bhatt and Priyanka Chopra. How is this list decided? Who makes the cut? For starters, it's invitation only. And once invited, you must pay up $50,000 for one ticket. Prices for tables begin at a whopping $300,000. Yes, that's a lot of money, but celebrities across the world don't mind shedding the cash, because going to the Met Gala meets the mark fashion-wise. Question is the Met itself missing the mark? The gala's purpose revolves around saving fashion. So far, it's raised over $200 million. And this money goes into a collection of over 33,000 pieces of fashion. That includes clothing, jewelry, and accessories. It documents fashion from the 1400s to now. And that sounds important, but it's not just the Costume Institute that's gaining from this. It's also the gala organizer, Vogue. In 2022, it sold live stream spaces for over $2 million, and the red carpet generates media value too. Last year, it was $543 million. So the intention is wonderful, but don't you think this money is doing much more than just saving fashion?
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with the US, the state of Illinois witnessed a massive dust storm. It caused many cars to crash. At least 6 people were killed. Many others were injured. The Indian Air Force participated in a multinational air exercise called Iniokos 23. It was hosted by Greece. The IAF flew its fighters and its fighter jets over the famous Acropolis of Athens. In Croatia, divers are cleaning trash around the Adriatic island. And imagine seeing the northern lights in India. A phenomenon similar to that was seen in Ladakh. An intense geomagnetic storm created an aurora. It's apparently extremely rare to see something like this at such a low altitude. We'll show you the video. Finally, what makes the 2nd of May significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day, Al-Qaeda chief and mastermind behind the 9/11 terror attack, Osama bin Laden, was killed. The year was 2011. Operation Neptune Spear was launched. 23 U.S. Navy SEALs in 2 Black Hawk helicopters reached Pakistan's Abbottabad. And this is where the world's most wanted terrorist was hiding. Pakistan, of course, lied about it. The operation lasted approximately 40 minutes. 5 people were killed, including bin Laden and one of his adult sons. He was buried at an undisclosed location in the Arabian Sea. US President Barack Obama held a television address and he said justice had been done. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, shit. Not even.
United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body. The death of bin Laden marks the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat Al-Qaeda.